Hello, and welcome back to the world of Wysteria. We will now conclude Chapter 15. When the young woman didn't resurface, Will looked downstream, expecting to see her body tumbling helplessly through the rapids. "What happened to her?" he said anxiously, fearing the worst. "Do you think she might be caught on the bottom, under a rock?" Emily, who'd gasped and clutched Will's arm when the woman first disappeared into the water, now relaxed her grip. "I don't think so," she said. "I have a feeling she's fine." "She's fine," he said, confused by her apparent lack of concern. How could the woman be fine? Unless Emily knew something that he didn't. "Is she a traveler?" he asked. For if so, she could wake up or jump away rather than drown. "I suppose it's possible," she said, "but I suspect she's something else." "Like what?" "I think she might be a mermaid," said Emily. "A mermaid? Are you serious?" he asked. "Well, not really a mermaid. A naiad or water nymph. I just like to call them that. Because it's cuter?" Emily laughed. "Yes, I suppose so." Will tried to recall what he knew of Greek mythology. "So you mean she's a goddess?" "A lesser goddess, perhaps," she said. "But yes, something along those lines. More like a fairy, I guess." "I thought you weren't sure whether beings like that existed," he said. "How do you know she's not another traveler, or one of my people?" Emily started to answer, but stopped. "What do you think, Will?" she asked. "It's your world. What does your instinct tell you?" Will considered her question. Though he'd encountered other mysterious individuals in Wysteria, this girl's behavior was more than strange. It struck him as otherworldly, supernatural. "I don't know, Emily," he answered. They both sat down on the grass, close enough to the edge of the precipice that they still had a view of the river. Will didn't expect the girl, whoever or whatever she was, to reappear, but he couldn't be certain. It didn't seem right to leave the scene while she might be in peril, even though there was little or nothing he could do to help her. "So, what's the difference between a goddess and a nymph or naiad?" he asked. "Nymphs are beings who inhabit specific natural objects or places," Emily replied. "A naiad is a water nymph, for example, while dryads are tree nymphs. They're the spirits that embody or dwell within those things. Gods and goddesses, in the classical sense, generally personify and rule over abstract concepts, such as love or discord or strength. And they're presumed to be eternal, truly immortal. According to theories I've heard, creatures like nymphs or fairies are born, or conceived perhaps, when the natural feature they inhabit comes into existence, and they die when their dwelling is gone, when their tree or forest is cut down, or their river dries up. But I don't know, maybe they can relocate." Will stared down at the river. It was strange to think that this flowing body of water might harbor a conscious spirit. a soul of sorts. What about angels, he asked. Nymphs, fairies, angels, these are all words and concepts that dreamers borrow from the waking world to describe the various indigenous residents of this universe. Some people use the terms interchangeably. Others make distinctions, assigning different terms to different species of beings. I've heard stories of encounters, and I know a number of dreamers, including Charlotte, who are convinced that these beings are very real. But so many strange things can and do happen in the worlds we visit. How could travelers ever know whether what they saw was a deity or just a part of the dream? I'd love to hear Jeremy's thoughts on the subject. He has referred to gods and goddesses in a way that seemed to imply he believes in them. But whenever I've tried to ask him about religious matters, he changed the subject. Maybe you would have better luck. So, has seeing this mermaid today made you a believer? Will asked. Emily thought for a moment. I can't rule out the possibility that the girl we saw is your creation, or an extraordinarily talented dreamer, she said. But based on what I saw and what my intuition tells me, I believe she is a true water fairy. As for the entire pantheon of divine entities, Emily let her sentence die and merely shrugged. As they sat on the bank, talked out for the moment, and no longer worried about the young woman's fate, Will's eyes drifted across the ravine to the dark forest on the other side. I wonder what's over there, he murmured. In the woods, she asked. Yes, he replied. And beyond. We could go see, but we'd have to get over there first, she pointed out. True, he said. There might be a bridge somewhere downstream, around the bend, hidden by the trees. And if there weren't one now, he could build one overnight. But this would be a perfect place for it, he thought, imagining a graceful stone arch, hundreds of feet long, spanning the chasm. The view from the center of such a structure would be stunning. He pictured himself standing at the apex of the arc, high above the rapids, looking directly into the falls. I'm going to try something, he announced, standing up. I'm going to see if I can build something, here, right now. Emily stood and looked across the canyon. To get us over there? What do you have in mind? A catapult? That's an interesting thought, he said, chuckling. But no, dear. Could he change the world right before his eyes? Was that possible? He saw no reason that it shouldn't be, and there was no harm in trying. Give me a minute, he said. Will took several deep breaths, then closed his eyes and envisioned a bridge, a ribbon of gray stone stretching up and over the divide, precarious to the eye, but rock solid and sturdy underfoot. But as the image took shape in his mind, his reason suddenly asserted itself, challenging the credibility of his design. How could such a structure hold its own weight? His logical faculty asked. At the very least, it would need massive supports, which conflicted with his mental blueprint. With the invasion of these critical thoughts, his mental picture of the stone arch dissolved into a hazy gray mist that hung in the air, fading slowly. Will opened his eyes, hoping to catch sight of some worldly manifestation of his intentions. There was a slight distortion of space and color where he'd imagined the bridge would stand, but this quickly vanished. "Did you see anything?" he asked Emily, wondering if his thoughts had made a visible impression in his world. "Yes," she said. "Some kind of structure started to appear there." She drew a shallow curve in the air with her outstretched hand. It seemed to be made of light, like a rainbow, but without the colors. "Were you trying to create a bridge?" she asked. "Yes," he responded, staring across the gorge. Will then told her why, he assumed, his plan had failed, that his concerns about the structural integrity of the bridge had caused the image to collapse. However, he wondered, and asked Emily, if building on the spot was even possible, regardless of the design or his confidence in it. "I've seen you build things spontaneously," she said. "That was different, though. You were creating things subconsciously, and they were emerging from a void where things were still undetermined. What you were trying to do is called conjuring, a highly advanced skill. I didn't say anything because I was afraid it would discourage you from trying. I wanted to see if you could do it. And before you ask why it's so difficult," she hurried to say, "I only know that it is. Although I imagine it has something to do with your beliefs about the world." Once again, Jeremy would be the one to ask. She'd correctly anticipated his question, but Will had another. "Under any circumstances, even overnight, could I have built that bridge, the one I had in mind?" he asked. "Can I build things that defy gravity? And if I did manage to bring it into existence, would it ever be safe to walk across? Wouldn't one moment of doubt bring it crashing down into the chasm?" "I've seen structures that seemed impossible, and certainly would be impossible in the waking world," Emily replied. "And yet they stood." It was yet more fodder for Will's daytime deliberations. "Well," he said, "I guess we won't be exploring over there today. Do you want to walk into town?" she asked him. Will was about to say, "Sure," when an image flashed through his mind. For a split second, he saw the falls as if he were standing on the balcony of his room in the keep. "Actually," he said, "I want to check the castle. I think someone may be there." "In the castle? Who?" "I don't know. Maybe no one," he said. "It's just a feeling." "Could it be Charlotte?" she suggested. "No, I don't think so." There was no scent of red roses in the air. Will had noticed a fragrance, earlier though, while they listened to the Naiad's song. Just briefly. It was an unfamiliar aroma, like smoky tanned leather, but his attention was otherwise occupied at the time. "Drifters?" said Emily. No alarm bells sounded in his head. "I doubt it," he replied, sensing no malevolent presence stirring within the high stone walls. "Then let's go see who it is," she said, taking his hand. Will couldn't leave her here alone. Not that she would agree to it. "Okay," he said. "But if I'm wrong and there's a fight, please jump away." Emily responded only with an innocent smile. They entered the castle and made directly for the keep. Once inside, Will led Emily up the stairs to the hall outside his chamber. Then, as they approached the doors, which were open as he'd left them, he let go of Emily's hand, stepped in front of her, and peered inside. Will instinctively threw his arm out to one side, blocking Emily from advancing past him. For they did have a visitor. A man stood on the balcony with his back to them, his hands resting on the railing as he looked down into the chasm. Before Will could speak, their guest turned and faced them. Will instantly recognized him as the mysterious gentleman he'd met in the garden. "Oh my God," Emily exclaimed. "It's Jeremy." And that concludes chapter 15, and we will return with chapter 16.